In just 7 minutes, get the essence of J.D. Vance's hard-hitting 20-minute speech at the Munich Security Conference on February 14, 2025. Vance tackles big issues like free speech, democracy, and mass migration, controversial, thought-provoking, and impossible to ignore. Stay tuned till the end for 10 powerful takeaways that could change the way you see global politics. Here are the key takeaways from the speech. Takeaway 1. The real threat to Europe is internal. J.D. Vance argues that the biggest danger to Europe is not Russia or China, but the retreat from its core democratic values. He expresses concern that some European leaders justify undemocratic actions like canceling elections under the guise of maintaining stability. He warns that censorship and suppressing opposition voices will weaken democracy rather than protect it. If democracies start silencing dissent, they risk becoming what they once stood against. For example, he mentions how a European commissioner openly admitted that elections could be annulled if they do not go as planned. That, Vance argues, is not democracy but controlled politics. What do you think? Should a government ever have the power to cancel an election? Let us know in the comments. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 2. Free speech is in retreat. Vance criticizes European governments for limiting free speech under the excuse of fighting hate speech or misinformation. He cites examples of censorship, including shutting down social media during civil unrest and prosecuting individuals for silent prayer. He warns that restricting what people can say will not make a society more stable, only more resentful. He draws a historical comparison, pointing out that regimes that suppress speech were never on the good side of history. For example, he mentions a man in the UK who was fined simply for silently praying near an abortion clinic. The government decided that even his private thoughts were a threat. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 3. A weak democracy is easy to manipulate. Vance challenges the idea that minor foreign interference, like Russian social media ads, can destroy a strong democracy. He argues that if a democracy can collapse because of a few online ads, it was already in trouble. Instead of blaming external forces, governments should focus on strengthening their own democratic institutions. He points out that fear of manipulation is often used as an excuse to silence certain political voices. For example, Romania recently canceled an election due to fears of Russian influence. But Vance argues that no democracy should be so fragile that a few Facebook posts can overturn its entire system. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 4. Excluding political opponents is dangerous. Vance criticizes the Munich Security Conference itself for banning certain political figures from participating. He argues that refusing to engage with different perspectives only increases political polarization. Silencing political movements does not make them disappear. It often makes them stronger. He emphasizes that democracy requires open debate, even with those we disagree with. For example, he says that banning both left and right-wing figures from discussions does not prevent extremism. It only drives it underground, where it becomes harder to address. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 5. Europe needs a clear vision. Vance questions what European nations are defending for, not just what they are defending against. He argues that military spending means nothing if leaders do not have a clear idea of their nation's future. He suggests that many European citizens feel disconnected from their governments, leading to political instability. A strong vision, rooted in national identity and democratic values, is necessary for true security. For example, he points out that European leaders often talk about protecting their nations from threats but struggle to explain what kind of society they are trying to build. We're halfway through the video. Thank you for sticking with us this far. If you're enjoying it, please give us a thumbs up and share it in your WhatsApp groups. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so feel free to comment below. To see more videos like this, make sure to hit the subscribe button. Now let's continue with the video. Takeaway 6. Mass migration is a crisis. Vance states that uncontrolled immigration has created security risks and social tensions in both Europe and the US. He claims that the current situation is not accidental, but a result of political choices over the past decade. He argues that leaders ignore their own citizens' concerns about migration, which leads to rising nationalist movements. He suggests that people are not necessarily anti-immigrant, but they want a say in who joins their society. For example, he references a tragic incident in Munich where an asylum seeker carried out an attack. He argues that such events are not isolated, but part of a broader trend resulting from poor immigration policies. Do you think current immigration policies in Europe and the US are working? Why or why not? Share your thoughts below. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 7. People want leaders who listen. Vance stresses that citizens care about their safety, economy, and future, not elite political theories. He criticizes global institutions for treating ordinary people as if they do not understand what is best for them. He believes dismissing voters' concerns will only lead to more political instability. Politicians should focus on representing their people rather than pushing ideological agendas. For example, he jokingly suggests that if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding everyone, Europe can handle a few months of Elon Musk voicing his opinions. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 8. Censorship creates more division. Vance argues that banning opinions or labeling them as misinformation will not make them go away. He warns that suppressing voices can radicalize people rather than change their minds. He criticizes both European governments and the previous U.S. administration for trying to control public discourse. He pledges that under Trump, there will be a renewed focus on free expression. For example, he points out that the U.S. government previously pressured social media companies to silence COVID-related theories that later turned out to be true. Now let's move to the next takeaway. Takeaway 9. Strong borders, strong democracy. Vance links secure borders with maintaining a stable and functional democracy. He argues that when governments lose control over who enters their country, they also lose control over their political future. He claims that a government that cannot secure its own borders cannot claim to be serving its people. He suggests that recent elections in Europe show that voters are demanding change on this issue. For example, he references Brexit as a case where voters clearly wanted more control over immigration, yet many politicians still tried to ignore their wishes. Now let's move to the last takeaway. Takeaway 10. Do not fear the people. Vance concludes by urging leaders to trust their citizens rather than fear them. He believes that democracy is not about controlling opinions, but about engaging with them. He warns that ignoring voters will only lead to instability and resentment. He emphasizes that a true democracy must be built on open dialogue and mutual respect. For example, he quotes Pope John Paul II, "Do not be afraid." He argues that leaders should not be afraid of different opinions, but should embrace debate as a sign of a healthy society. Thank you for watching. I hope you found this summary of the J.D. Vance speech at Munich Security Conference informative. If you enjoyed watching this video, please leave a like below and share this video in your WhatsApp groups. You can also discuss about this video by commenting below. To get more such videos in your timeline, press the subscribe button below.